Okay. Testing this out. We're testing this out. Nice. I think it is working. I can hear myself. Yeah, we're up on YouTube. Let's go. Hello, YouTube. My name is Zero, and we're gonna be doing something a bit different today. Let me get rid of the echo. There we go. Oh. There we go. All right. We're gonna let the music play as an outro, or as an intro, as an outro. That's cool. You put it beside. Oh, whoops. Sorry, I'm getting used to the settings here. It's a little different than how it's done on Twitch. I don't. Why did it dock the chat? Trying to make the chat a little smaller. Almost had it like optimized. Anyways, it's all good. Hello and welcome. Like I said, my name is Zero. If you could tell by the title, we're going to be talking a little bit about politics, specifically Canadian politics, as a lot is happening in the world, and I've thought to basically talk about politics and, you know, all the craziness that's been going on in the world. So yeah. A little bit of a formal introduction, I guess. Like I said, my name is Zero. I have tried streaming on Twitch a bit. Just not the greatest for discoverability, but I sort of feel like I have kind of the hang of live streaming now a little bit. So I feel like I can kind of attempt this now on YouTube. So a little bit of, I guess, a more formal background. I worked as a news reporter previously for the city of Vaughan. Not for the city of Vaughan, but reporting on the city of Vaughan. Worked as a freelance journalist in a couple outlets as well. Most notably, I'd be known for my work in Complex Canada as a music journalist, as well as covering, you know, other stuff as well. I'm quite pretty knowledgeable in political stuff. Political science was a large kind of portion of my degree, or more accurately, I guess, political economy or the history of politics, rather than current political science. But we definitely talked about political thought and the history of those ideas. Yeah. What else can I say? If you check out my channel, like I said, as a music journalist, a lot of the content I've made previously was catered towards music, which was a hobby. I used to run a blog. The music's a bit loud. I used to run a blog called Deep Freeze Chillin', and that was sort of my pride and joy for a while. It did relatively decent in terms of web traffic, just something I failed to monetize. And unfortunately, music journalism, just the reality is it just doesn't pay very well. That being said, I'm hoping at least to, like I said, kind of get a better hang of the overall vibe of live streaming and see if it can benefit me at all, or just bring discourse, bring something to the table. A lot of things are happening in politics. Politics affects our everyday lives. I think it's very important to be knowledgeable and talk about what's going on in the world. Yeah. What else can I say? Yeah, if you want to check out the Twitch and previous live streams, it's just Vizuro under Twitch. Last stream I did was talking about the Ontario election debate that was recently held in, I think it was held in Toronto, wasn't it? It was held at the CBC office. So yeah, things of that nature. That's what we're gonna cover. So I've been vamping for a bit. I think we're now gonna get into it. So I hope that all my settings don't have to be reset now because we're streaming on YouTube, but we shall see. Let me see if I can bring up my... Oh, you know what's funny? I use YouTube actually a lot when I stream on Twitch because I have like a playlist. I have like a playlist for streaming for various things I want to show. Okay, so we're just gonna skip that ad. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was something I saw on the Line Editor, which is a Substack of relatively conservative, sort of center-right opinion, but it's good to, you know, diverse or consume a diverse sort of net of media consumption and kind of see what other ideas are out there. I would say personally, my own personal perspective is sort of coming from a more left of center background. I wouldn't say, I feel like liberal has sort of become like, people on the right and the left call themselves liberal, so it's really, to me, liberal is centrist. Like the Liberal Party in Canada here has been notably been considered a centrist party for the longest time. That sort of changed more recently with the wake of figures like Justin Trudeau, who is more center left. I would, even though I'm not the hugest fan of the guy, I would definitely say my political perspective, at least where we're on in the spectrum, more so align in that sense. I would argue I'm probably a little more center left than Trudeau, but it is what it is. Okay, so we're gonna see if I can get perfect. Got it. Got it. Oh yeah, okay. So this. So right now we're gonna take a look. Oh yeah, I was wondering why I gave that whole spiel. So the reason I gave that spiel about the Line Editor is because the Line Editor actually came out with this article talking about David Elby the premier of British Columbia, who is notably a NDP premier, one of the few, and that's elected into power, or that has been elected into power. His government is struggling to kind of hold on and to that power, but he was very outspoken, an outspoken critic of Trump. Has Was one of the premiers who went. I think all of the premiers actually went down to Washington, basically, to tell Trump not to do the tariffs, but as also to reinforce the idea that Canada will not acquiesce to the United States, and we will not become the 51st state, whether it's that in jest or not. So that is to say, David Elby, again, is a very outspoken person, and so he's come out in a throne speech along with the lieutenant governor, basically using wartime imagery of World War II and comparing the Trump administration to the Nazis, and kind of saying like, Canada is prepared to fight in a way. Even right now it is an economic war, but that the language is so. Yeah, like things are happening in Canada. Let's just say that. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of the music here because it is a bit distracting. We'll take a look at some of this. So this is the Canadian. Oh, sorry, this isn't the Canadian Press one. This is the CBC in British Columbia.
First session of British Columbia's 43rd Parliament at the most consequential time for our province since the Second World War.
The throne speech began with a stark warning from history as the BC government prepares for a new challenge.
In the face of an unprecedented and unjustified threat to our economy, British Columbians are joining with all Canadians to fight back.
A government defending British Columbians from a potential economic war waged by our southern neighbour and closest trading partner.
We will never be the 51st state, not now or ever.
BC's new Lieutenant Governor, Wendy Kokia, delivered her first throne speech. While it did not mention Donald Trump by name, he was a looming figure throughout.
During its first 4 weeks, the new United States presidential administration has taken our country on a roller coaster ride.
The speech doubled down on wartime rhetoric amid the economic threat of tariffs.
When Britain stood alone in Europe against the Nazis, Churchill made a desperate appeal for more military equipment. British Columbia answered the call.
The BC Conservatives, making their debut in the legislature as the official opposition, say the speech blames the United States for the NDP's financial mismanagement.
David Eby is looking for an enemy. He's looking for an excuse. He wants to be able to blame somebody for his failures.
The Premier, however, defended the wartime references.
We've fought with the Americans in World War II side by side. That's why this feels like such a profound betrayal.
Rustad has pledged to do everything he can to bring.
And I mean, he's pretty right about that. A lot of Canadians are very upset. Very upset. I mean, our relationship with the U.S. has deteriorated substantially. A lot of Canadians are just finding it like it's interesting because Donald Trump, in a weird way, has reinvigorated a sort of sense of lost patriotism in Canada. I don't remember people being so gung-ho about Canada, especially in the last couple of years as we start to do like truth and reconciliation and stuff like that, and come to terms with the genocide that we did to the First Nations peoples and things of that nature. I mean, I would say that's pretty much the big one, but as well as our the realities of settler colonialism, right, is sort of residential schools being one of the biggest things here in Canada. In fact, my university was the one that was, or at least one of the ones that was renamed because it was named after a settler colonialist, let's say, and yeah, it wasn't without controversy, but it is what it is. So. Yeah,
bring down the
Lawrence.
government, which has a bare majority of 47 seats, plus support from the 2 BC Green MLAs. The Conservatives have 44 seats.
It is both
The speech
thoughtful
did not
and
make
tough.
any major new promises, but said there will be legislation to protect British Columbians from credit card fraud, unfair practices by cell phone companies, and to recover healthcare costs from wrongdoers. The NDP's Raj Shoen was re-elected as Speaker. The government will present its budget on March 4th, the same day Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs are set to take effect. Finance Minister Brenda Bailey has already warned that the $1,000 grocery rebate, a key NDP election promise, has been cancelled. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
In this election, you can vote early by mail, vote at an advanced poll, or vote on Election Day. Learn all the ways you can mark your X and vote
I'm okay
at
with this ad.
elections.on.ca.
Whether it was COVID or whether it's this moment, when we talk about the moments in
Yeah, so this is the other thing. Like, I guess a lot of conservative media, let's say, is sort of being almost hysterical about David Elby invoking wartime imagery. But I mean, we did that for COVID with good reason. But I mean, there is a precedent there. And yeah, I mean, Trump after COVID is an existential threat. So I don't disagree with this. Yeah, it's interesting that there was any sort of pushback from this. It's more symbolic than anything. We can take a look at the former U.S. Vikings player who literally went into, I think it was like a U.S. Senate committee or something, and basically called MAGA like Nazis like directly to their faces. But we can take a look at that maybe a bit later.
history, when Canadians and British Columbians came together, often they were wars. Often they were external threats to the safety and democracy of Canadians and people around the world. And that is what we need in this moment. We need everybody to come together. We need labor and business to work together. We need Indigenous leadership to be on side. We need all the members of this Legislative Assembly to work to ensure that we're responding to this. Because regardless of whether your house is bombed or whether you're foreclosed from it because you're fired, makes very little difference to a family.
I found it quite interesting that there's a number of things that really were not highlighted in the Throne speech. In particular, the issue of fentanyl. They did talk about it briefly, but the reality is, with now over 16,000, 17,000 people in this province have died from overdoses. With this being the key trade issue with the Americans.
Okay, so that's a lie. So this is something I've covered in Twitch, but yeah, no reasonable Canadian believes the fentanyl excuse. I mean, Donald Trump himself on Truth Social said he just used the fentanyl and the border thing as an excuse to implement the tariffs on steel. I think this was actually before the steel and aluminum, because he did the steel and aluminum one, but he used that as an excuse because in the NAFTA agreement there is a provision in the new NAFTA, CUSMA, or the USMCA, whichever version you want to say, there is a provision saying that you can't like unfairly tariff one party. So, as President of the United States, he overreached his power by basically enacting a state of emergency and basically saying that there was a border crisis and fentanyl was being smuggled from Canada into the US, when that is like completely untrue statistically, right? Like, if anything, there's more of a crisis of guns coming from the US into the United States. So if anyone was sort of to give a punitive measure for things going illegally across the border, it should be Canada. But that's kind of besides the point. Again, it was an overreach of power. It's interesting the conservative leader in BC is saying this. I'm not sure he believes this himself. I know fentanyl, of course, was a huge issue in BC. I spent some time in BC. I talked to some people who were directly affected by the fentanyl crisis. I spoke to, these family members, and for sure, it's a problem. Like we're not going to deny the opioid epidemic and its after effects with the fentanyl crisis, but at the same time, that's the framing here is incorrect. And I mean, I'm surprised that the BC conservative leader has any sort of motion here whatsoever, comparatively, because from my understanding, like the BC Liberals are considered conservative in BC, right? Like BC, like from what my understanding, BC is usually the one province that is like, we're voting NDP, we want progressivism. Like BC is seen as the progressive province of Canada. So it's really interesting how that's sort of shifted over the years. I believe right now there's a conservative mayor actually in Vancouver. And like my understanding is like David Elby has sort of like a weak claim to power. I don't know too much about BC politics, but my understanding is like there's, he may or may not have been directly elected. I don't know if there was an election. So again, it's not something I'm following super closely, just because it's so far removed. But I mean, if I keep doing these streams, this is definitely something I'd like to be more familiar with if we're going to cover all of Canada, which I think is important, especially in the wake of these tariffs, in the wake of Donald Trump, and to, consolidate like Canadian identity. I think that's very important. And yeah, like I think just doing this in a weird way is sort of like patriotic by covering the Canadian media in a way that it should be covered, in a way it should be analyzed. A lot of people lack media literacy, so I think this is something we can talk about and analyze and break down and digest, hopefully. That being said, let's finish with
along with the issue of reports and overall security.
Okay, so the Canadian press video there.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the O Show.
Welcome to the O Show, Canada's current affairs show with strong opinions. I'm your host, Laura Babcock. And in case you missed it, Mr. Ford went to Washington and failed epically. Embarrassing. And in case you missed it, and the latest polls, Mr. Mark Carney is on his way to Ottawa, and he's likely to succeed. We're talking a potential Liberal majority, which is why there's a big scramble afoot to bring back Parliament, to end this prorogation, and to quickly try to get Pierre.
Okay, so I do agree that Mark Carney's numbers are pretty good. I think he's definitely going to win Liberal leadership, which needs to happen before we can say definitively that the Liberals would win a majority government. I don't know where she's getting that figure. I believe Laura has some journalistic training, so I believe she's pulling that up from somewhere. I do think the Liberals have a chance. I don't know about a majority government. Seems odd. I could see the Liberals eking by a minority government. I don't know where she's getting this number. So we'll watch the video and see, but I'd be curious where she's getting that poll data from.
Poilievre in as prime minister. I've got an issue with that because there are people in the Trump campaign that want to have Pierre Poilievre as prime minister, including Elon Musk. And if you're paying attention, Canada and Ontario, these are fraught times. And the last thing we need is the regime that would invade us, something that Trump has reiterated, in front of the largest audience in the US during the Super Bowl. They want Canada. He has said it. We now know it. And therefore, we should have nobody anything adjacent to the Trump regime running anything in Canada. Not our country, not Ontario, not Alberta, not anywhere. We are in an economic war that is meant to break us and to take us. And I'm very, very, very alarmed, but we're also not going to just roll over. We are going to fight, and we are going to make our country stronger than ever. And I know two people who help with that every single time that they join me here on the O Show. That is, of course, Keith Leslie, legendary Queen's Park reporter from Ontario, who's now living on the East Coast, and Mark Cripps, who worked in government, was a publisher in a legacy media back in the day, and always brings exactly what's in his heart and his mind. And I know that that resonates because clips from the last O Show scandal panel had hundreds of thousands of views if we total them up. And it's because all of you are paying attention. You're sharing the podcast, you're subscribing on YouTube, you're watching it across all the socials. And I want to thank you because the conversation we're about to have today is unscripted, uncut as usual. But I know that these guys have a hell of a lot to say. So let me start as we always do on the O Show scandal panel with Keith Leslie. Keith, from your wisdom, from your viewpoint, from your tracking of the Ontario election, which is coming up February 27th, and everything else, all the shenanigans in Washington, and the latest polls in Ottawa, where do you want to start, my wise friend?
Well, you mentioned the Premier's trip to Washington. All the premiers, not just Premier Ford, but all the premiers went down. And at the very last, he had a couple of speeches, which turned out the media quickly discovered were mostly Canadian businessmen in Washington. Right. But still, he delivered his message.
Okay,
and
so
then at the very last minute,
I want to. Okay, he makes a great point. I want to show this. So hold on. Make sure I show this without doxing myself here, but God. But incorrect. Okay. Shall see. Bye. Dude. There we go. We're in. No, don't care. Okay. So now that we're on Twitter, there is a tweet I want to show, and this is, where would I find this? I believe likes. Really should have been more prepared, but hey, sometimes you gotta just do stuff by the seat of your pants. What am I looking for here? We're looking for the gaff. The gaff. That's what it was. Gaff. So okay. Damn, was it that long ago? Ah, here it was, February 12th. Now does feel Well, yeah, I guess that's a week ago. Okay. We're going to take a look at this. Sorry, it took a while to pull that up there, but so
Ford is going to be about 2 miles from the White House over in that direction, and that is about as close as Doug Ford is going to get to Donald Trump on this trip. Thank you so much. Doug Ford takes the stage at what's billed as a speech to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
I just want to tell you, I love the U.S. I love the American people.
Turns out, Ford's audience in this Washington hotel is largely Canadian. Finding an actual American business person in the crowd proves hard.
I'm Josh Morgan, I'm the mayor of the City of London.
I'm the co-president of AGS Automotive, one of the oldest
this is such,
in Canada.
like, that's so good, man. That's such a hell of a gaffe. That is one hell of a gaffe. That Doug Ford's like, I love America, to a bunch of Canadian business leaders. That's so funny, dude. That's like a Curb fucking bit. You know what I mean? It's so funny. So funny. Why? Okay. We'll go back to Laura of the O Show and taking a look there. I'm gonna have to constantly move stuff in OBS, but hey, it's all good.
Somehow, through some strange thing, someone arranged a meeting in the White House with the deputy chief of staff for foreign subnational government representatives, or some darn, like some guy we've never heard of. But the premiers at least got that meeting in the White House with somebody. Meanwhile, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, the federal finance minister, is also meeting in the White House with Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. So that's at least some serious shit going down there. That's what we need to see, at least. I don't know how far he got, but at least he's talking to the Commerce Secretary, not some deputy chief of staff for whatever, like how many of them, dozens of them under Trump. Right. So this guy, though, after the meeting with the premiers, comes running out. And here's the headline all across Canada today from the premiers meeting going to Washington is, White House official says, I never promised Canada wouldn't be a 51st state, never agreed to that. I said I'd take that message to Donald Trump. This is what we got out of this? That we're back to this 51st state nonsense, and that's all they got as a headline. And this guy making it very emphatic. We can't discount this nonsense. This whole economic force that Trump promised to use, he said at the time it would be to get us to become a 51st state. Here's an official, and this is what.
And I think a lot of Americans don't understand this, right? Like I seen some Americans like upset that we booed the national anthem, and it's like, dog, you've talked about destabilizing our economy, which we are reliant on, like. We are reliant heavily on U.S. and you're gonna like try to abuse that and like threaten our sovereignty. Like, what the fuck? And you think we're not gonna boo you? Like, fuck you. Like, if anything, we're being pretty chill about it, I'd say. You know what I mean? Like, I definitely think. You know, Trudeau, for all things considered, like he has been pretty measured on, I would say, sort of these more global, wide-spanning sort of issues. Like he hasn't maybe been the best on, you know, domestic stuff necessarily. I mean, I guess COVID would be the exception, but COVID I sort of count under that world umbrella. But yeah, like we definitely could have had a more hot-headed PM. I mean, even Jean Chrétien, who was a beloved Prime Minister of Canada, like if you had called Canada the 51st state when Jean Chrétien was Prime Minister, I think we'd be having a different conversation. You know what I mean? Like Jean Chrétien is known for like nearly punching the guy out who threw a pie in his face. You know what I mean? So it is what it is, but we'll continue on.
What this official took away after meeting with 13 Canadian premiers in the White House, he comes running out and posts online right away. No. I never agreed that we would, that Canada would never be a 51st state. We didn't say that. So this is actually part of their priority, part of the tariff war, part of all this, or at least, and he said as well,
we don't
listen to
know.
what the president says, listen to his words. Well, his words have been pretty emphatic and nonstop about Canada not being a viable country and all this kind of nonsense. And we know that, you know, their economy is 10 times the size of ours. So if they want to economically beat us to death, they can do it. Although I don't know if steel and aluminum in particular is the way to go, especially when we
Yeah.
also heard confirmation from the White House
True.
this week that they put on the 25% on steel and aluminum. Oh, and when the next review, when that 30-day pause on the other 25% comes off, they're going to be added on top. It's going to be 50% on steel and aluminum. How's that going over? Like, seriously, that's just going to cause factories to shut down, orders to stop. Investment is already drying up in both countries because, well, more probably goes to the U.S., but investment in Canada is just on hold. Who's going to invest here when we need to get to the U.S. market?
He's
So all
100% right about that as well. Recently, there was an article basically saying that all investment in Canada has stopped. I believe it was by the CBC. Let me see if I can pull that up. CBC investment Canada has stopped. Yeah, here it is. 4 days ago. This is what he's talking about here. Pull that up. Tariff threats are already driving investment out of Canada. Business investment was already weak. Now it's getting even weaker, by Peter Armstrong at CBC News. And he is basically saying, so this article is basically stating that after the tariffs, even when there were no tariffs, people were already sort of like on the fray, I guess, just about like investing. Because they're like, well, it's too risky, you know what I mean, with these imposing tariffs. Whether or not they ever be put in place, the damage is done, said Greg Mordew, a former auto industry executive and associate professor at the W. Booth School of Engineering Practice and Technology at McMaster University. So the Trump threats have already changed the landscape, whether he goes with ahead with the tariffs or not. And the auto industry, of course, is the big sort of industry that will probably be first affected by the tariffs. The steel and aluminum is definitely going to hurt our auto industry. And I think there may be a specific auto industry tariff, which I'm not sure if it's already been put in place. I know there were talks, but yeah, for at least the next 4 years, there will be no serious investment in Canadian automotive industry, said Mordew. So one of the things I was wondering is, you know, I know this Liberal government has invested pretty heavily previously into EVs, into electric vehicles. So I'm wondering if there's a way to perhaps manufacture these vehicles or look at alternative options other than steel to perhaps introduce like an EV market. And I definitely think we could, perhaps do trade with the EU, things of that nature. Even if no tariffs were imposed, a long period of uncertainty under the cloud of tariff threats would almost certainly damage business investment in Canada, with the central bank in its summary of deliberations. So yeah, basically just to reiterate the point there. So we'll go back into video.
all of this, the premiers, as I say, our friend and commentator Amanda Galbraith likened them to the Beverly Hillbillies going to Washington. I don't know if that was fair. But on the other hand, from a campaign point of view, this is 2 days that the premier got to leave the province in the middle of an election campaign, right in the middle of it, and talk about the one issue he actually really, really wants to stay on track of and talk about nonstop is, protecting Ontario, protecting Canada from the tariffs. And he got to be in the picture, the center of the picture, leading forward from all the other premiers. That's, it's playing. So from a campaign strategy point of view, bang on. It played right to him. And the opposition parties in Ontario, they really want to talk about the problems with the Ford government, their bad record, healthcare, all these other issues that need to be talked about, affordability.
And one thing I have been shouting from the mountaintops is that the Ford government is at a deficit. conservatives are just inherently assumed to be better at budgeting. This was something that Doug Ford constantly did in the debate is, he was basically characterized as the progressive candidates bad at budgeting, even though Mike Schreiner of the Green Party was the only party leader to have a costed platform. The NDP over the years, both federally and provincially, in the Ontario debates, and flip-flopping all over the place, both federally and provincially have done a concerted effort over the years to be more mindful about this inherent biases that people assume that left-leaning politicians aren't good with money. Olivia Chow most recently did a very responsible budget. She asked for public opinion. She even, I believe, sold off part of the Gardner to get money for the city because the municipality can't run at a deficit, and it gave her the money needed. And yes, she is the progressive mayor. So again, people are just take these things for granted, and it's interesting how these biases play out in real time. Perception isn't reality, and people really need to understand that.
But they can't really position themselves on the tariff thing, because then they're just playing into him. And every time we're talking about the tariffs, it plays into him. They can't really get in on that story. So it's from a campaign point of view, these were 2 days very effective. And then he's taking today off to prep for the Northern debate. So that's 3 solid days where basically Ford is not distracted from his message at all. And it plays across the country. He still comes across, like he's making the talking points. He was talking about aluminum and how much it would hurt the Americans right away, and how quickly they can't come up to capacity and all. Very informed. And, aluminum's not Ontario's issue. It's more Quebec and BC. But he was there as the Captain Canada thing. So campaigning, very effective. Mm-hmm. Overall, getting information through to Trump and making any dent in the White House, I think Dominic LeBlanc's one meeting went a lot further than the 13 premiers were able to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that Ford, it was performative. He even cut a cheesy video and posted it of, how he's taken the message to America, when in fact the media finally exposed the fact that his audiences at the Chamber of Commerce down there in Washington was mostly Canadians. They couldn't even get American business people to talk. Ford came out and did a presser in front of the big back set that we all paid for of the White House, or Capitol Hill, wherever he was, trying to make the point that, he had big meetings in Washington, but he wouldn't say who he met with. And to your point, Keith, the Trump administration does what it always does. It blows people out of the water on social media shortly thereafter, and totally humiliated him by saying, yeah, you met with me and we never said anything about being okay with the 51st state. Oh, and by the way, just listen to Trump. In other words, you have no standing here, Premier Ford. So Keith, will some people see that visual and think, oh, our man is down there fighting Trump? Maybe. But there's many of us who know that as long as he's in bed on the Starlink deal, overpaying Elon Musk to be in Ontario's internet.
Yeah, and that's that was a huge thing, right? Is that he made the deal with Elon Musk. I mean, I understand why, because Starlink has an efficient satellite system, but and would be useful for rural areas. But the problem is you just can't trust Musk, and he has way too much power. He's the world's richest man. He controls one of the biggest social media platforms out there. Politicians really needed to rein in a lot of these I don't know if technocrats is the right word, but what does technocrat mean? Is technocrat Yes, okay, he is a tech. Thank you. He is a technocrat. I wanted to be sure I was using that word correctly. So yeah, so the government just did a piss poor job of reining in technocrats for the last 10 years, right? Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, all the billionaires now that are ruining people's lives, right? So that's what we're sort of seeing with the new Trump administration. And yeah, it's not good.
how highly problematic that is. And he'll go in the Northern debate and say he's delivering internet to Northern Ontario.
Bro,
but
how are there
he's doing it
spammers on
with
YouTube
Elon
too?
Musk.
God damn it, bro. Holy fuck. Like, I legit don't even know how they did that. Like, God damn it, dude. All right. We're just going to continue on.
So yes, well, people who are following this closely understand the risk of Ford being so close to the Trump regime in that way, but having absolutely no impact whatsoever on what the Trump regime wants to do to Canada. Those of us who are informed see that, and we also know that a vote for Ford is a vote for more money going to private sector and to developers, and not to people on ODSP and not to healthcare.
Great point.
An informed electorate understands the risk of Ford and how performative nonsense this all is. But unfortunately, of course, in a very short election in the winter, when the very people who need to vote the most can't make it to the polls in the snow, Ford is probably going to roll in with another majority. That being said, the election hasn't happened yet. There's still a couple of weeks to go. Mark?
Okay, so this was recorded a week ago, so there's now a week till the election. So I'm just gonna check in on Twitch and see if, because I didn't think it'd be streaming at the same time, as far as I know. Stream from an hour ago, 45 seconds. Okay. Yeah, you fucking idiot. We're on fucking Twitch. Fucking bot. I don't know how you fucking... What? I'm reporting your ass? Okay. What? Spam already. Block. We can block Twitch chat easy too. So they literally went into my Twitch chat to fucking spam. God damn it, bro. I didn't even think that was like possible, that you could type in my chat at the same time on Twitch. Like, that's crazy. That's like big brain fucking like scammer shit. God damn. All right. Let's continue on.
You know, I found the whole thing insulting. And again, you know, this isn't, it's not, you know, about not liking Ford or liking another party. I don't care. I find this whole campaign, this whole election to be a fucking insult to everyone's intelligence. And they are capitalizing on a moment, pretending to be and accomplish things that they have no ability to accomplish, which is protect Canada, Ontario from Donald Trump's madness. And we're not talking about, and some may say this is actually brilliant, because what are we not talking about? We are not talking about, and Keith pointed out that the opposition leaders are having such a struggle trying to get their foot in this campaign about things that actually matter. Healthcare, education, corruption in the government.
Right. He brings up a great point, because these are issues actually affecting Ontarians, right? This is sort of the kitchen table politics discussions that are happening that is not being addressed by this election. Ford specifically called this election because he said he wanted a mandate to deal with Trump's tariffs, which, yes, they are an issue, but whatever government is in power is going to deal with that. It's also a federal issue. Yes, Ontario is, one of the biggest province, if not the biggest province, and does a huge amount of trade, but like Captain Canada, you ain't PM, like, like, rein it in, buddy. Like, look what you did. You made all the premiers go to Washington, and like you made us look silly. Like that's actually egg on your face, and you look the stupidest. So now what? You know what I mean? So be serious. You know what I mean? And to a degree, I mean, I do think Ford is treating the tariffs as a serious threat, at least. But I just think, just like straight up, Ontarians deserve better. They deserve better. They're tired of Ford, and unfortunately, with this Liberal Party, I don't feel that the Liberal Party is much better. I actually think in some ways that Bonnie Crombie might be worse. Unfortunately, Bonnie Crombie and Merritt Stiles of the NDP are basically running for second place. I personally like Merritt as the NDP leader. I think she's running a great opposition party. And basically, I think this election is just going to weaken the NDP. I think that's the only thing that's going to happen. Maybe if we're lucky, Ford loses his majority, which he called this election, even though he already had a majority, he called an early election. So it's just a consolidation of power. It sort of, if anything, kind of reiterates the point of you know what, I won't say it's corrupt, because there are some legitimate reasons to call early elections and stuff like that, but it does feel there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. You know what I mean? It does feel like that.
Government, we are not having those conversations. So I found the whole thing insulting. I think people need to remember, please remember, Doug Ford loves Donald Trump. Doug Ford is a phony. Doug Ford has told you again and again that he would never waver, that he supports. He got caught on tape. He's been saying it over and over again. This guy is a phony. And for whatever reason, people are falling into a trap by his little performative shit on the taxpayer's dime, I might add. While there's a campaign going on, he's breaking rules with financing his trips down there. And I find it insulting. And I'm very sad at the state of the electorate in this province. If they are going to, I saw something the other day said he may win 100 fucking seats. Are we nuts? Like,
we're cooked, bro.
I'm just going to tell you right now.
Bro, we're cooked. If Doug Ford wins 100 seats, we're so cooked. We're so cooked. 7 years, man. This guy's been in charge 7 years. I really don't understand any sort of loyalty that people have to the Ford brothers. Like, Rob Ford wasn't a very good mayor. I mean, notoriously, he acted a fool on stage. It brought this weird sort of shame to Canada, and I guess it, in a weird way, I guess it was endearing to some of the Americans, where they were just like, oh, they're just like us and have like crazy caricature politicians. But I remember talking to, my colleagues at work, for example, who liked Ford, but otherwise wouldn't have like necessarily voted with like conservative sort of ideas. I based on my conversations, but I mean, I could be wrong, and over time that may have changed. But yeah, like, just wasn't a good mayor. Doug Ford as a city councilor wasn't good. Like, just like, it's just insane. Like I said, it's just like Ford has always been one to clutch to power, and it's just very telling. And unfortunately, this election, the early called election, is just another example of that. Right now, you could argue the same thing for Trudeau, and yes, to a degree, not even to a degree. Like, we're just being honest. he's staying, or he resigned, but he's waiting, or he prorogued government in order to have a viable liberal option, because otherwise the conservatives would have won like 100%. And they still might, right? So it is what it is. But I think a lot of people are okay with that in a weird way, because Canadians, at least generally throughout history, have identified themselves with a sort of more progressive mindset, a more liberal mindset, right? So it's kind of changed over the years, and especially now, because I think we were a little more used to more centrist sort of style of governance. So I think now when people saw a little more left leaning, it kind of scared them a bit, even though there are good things. For example, the high speed rail that was just announced between Toronto and Montreal, that we probably wouldn't have gotten from a conservative federal government. And oh, would you look at that? There's actually some interesting infrastructure that is going to be quite good for the country being built. You know what I mean? So there are good things, there are bad things, but yeah, Ford just isn't it, unfortunately. I wish the Ontario Liberals had a better leader. Bonnie Crombie, to me, she ain't it either. She's more of a center-right Liberal, kind of going in the opposite direction. And her pleading for the progressive vote also rubbed me the wrong way when she's just Doug Ford.
Right now, if you give Doug Ford 100 seats, it don't matter what the RCMP says. It doesn't matter how much corruption these guys do in the next 4 years. You have basically said, it don't matter. It don't matter to me. And that's what I find. That's what I find.
Yeah.
Really.
Okay. So a couple of things. We are having the conversations. We're having the conversations about the green belt. We're having the conversations about corruption. We're having the conversations about healthcare. We're having the conversations about people who are on disability here on the O Show. And our conversations are getting hundreds of thousands of views. So I don't know what the papers are getting these days, but I just want our audience to know.
Okay. Well, like, I'll like, if you want to watch the rest of that, support the O Show with Laura Bobcock. This is actually probably the first one. Maybe I've seen clips in here. I don't know if she's got the numbers to support her claims here, but I mean, hey, as somebody who's dealt with SEO, web traffic, and run a website, I mean, do you, girl? Like, I'm not gonna take anything away from you. But I think maybe we can move on from this video, support the channel, and I think they're having a good and much needed discussion that needs to be had in terms of the political scene here. And these are some, I believe, so the gentleman to the bottom, I believe, was in publishing. I don't remember what the gentleman on the left-hand side was. I think he was some sort of advisor, I believe, like government. No, maybe not government. I don't quite remember. Sometimes I have bad short-term memory. Okay, moving on. Next story. Okay, so we went through the throne speech. Some ways it's easier to do this on Twitch, at least to switch topics. But maybe that's because I'm just used to like preparing more for Twitch streams, and this was like, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna try on YouTube today. Yeah, so we can review the TVO. So TVO did a video where they basically reviewed the Ontario election debate that was held, and basically reviewed and gave everybody a sort of score and summary, so we could take a look at that, as well as the CBC I Am Canadian interview. So we can take a look at that as well. So I will probably look for the I Am Canadian one. So I Am Canadian. This was very interesting.
Who knew sweet mornings could have...
Okay. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, so this gentleman here is the actor that is famous for, or this is the actor that was in the very well-known, very famous "I Am Canadian" ad. It's very interesting to hear him talk about his experiences, his lived experiences, traveling Canada and seeing what Canadians are. I think this dude, in a weird way, he should even like maybe like write a book, because I'd be very interested in hearing what he has to say. Because he even says in this video he's visited places in Canada that a lot of Canadians don't get to see. I'm from Ontario. I've been to Quebec and I've been to BC, but I haven't been to the Maritimes, for example. And the Maritimes has its own idiosyncrasies, has its own culture, and I'd be very interested in hearing what his thoughts are on, or hearing or seeing his thoughts on, you know, what's happening in the Yukon, right? Like just a different perspective, because we do often hear sort of, I guess, perspectives more from the cities most often, just because the way information is sort of disseminated through the big city centers, for example. It'd be interesting. Something I've like now recently have tried to look at is, especially like when doing Twitch streams like this, I remember pulling up APTN, which stands for the Aboriginals People Television Network. And so that gives like a First Nations perspective. And then like another one was like Cabin Radio up in the Northwest Territories. And that, again, that's sort of talking about like more northern issues, right? So again, it all kind of ebbs and flows, if that sort of makes sense. So I am rambling
Years
a bit.
ago,
Let's get into the video.
I was the Molson Canadian guy, and that commercial changed my life.
He's from Nova Scotia.
I'm not a lumberjack or a fur trader, and I don't live in an igloo or eat blubber or own a dog sled.
And I don't know Jimmy, Sally, or Susie from Canada, although I'm certain they're really, really nice.
I remember when we ultimately we did the test, and then Molson decided, yeah, we're going to do the commercial. And I remember the day we shot the commercial, the VP of marketing at the time for Molson said, we're going to ruin your life with this commercial. Glenn Hunt, who created the spot, he was the director, creative director at Ben Simon, Byrne and Darcy at the time. He said that I was the third person they saw. He said that it was the thank you ad lib at the end, thank you, that made him go, that is the guy. Laurie Estabrooks, who produced the spot, said it was because I had a wicked bad hockey haircut at the time. But the interesting thing about that commercial, and I think a big part of why it landed the way it did, is that it was ready in time for it to go on the wait list for the Oscars, for the Academy Awards that night. And so Molson did a media buy and got on the wait list. Robin Williams was hosting.
Yeah, so this part is very interesting. This is a little bit of lore. I never knew this. So he explains how it was just serendipity, basically, that it was just the perfect tie-in to something Robin Williams did during his Oscars performance. And it just went over aces. And yeah, basically people were like, whoa, what is that commercial, right? Like, it's very interesting.
That year, he took the program long, and at a certain point, he did a performance of Blame Canada from South Park.
Now, blame Canada, blame Canada. It seems that everything's gone wrong. Send Canada.
Then they went to commercial break, and the rant came up. It was pure happenstance. Molson decided they wanted to go out and do live performances of this little speech. And so we ended up going out to I think Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, and then in Toronto, and culminated in a trip across the country on Canada Day, where I started at midnight in St. John's, Newfoundland, and made my way across the country. That tour was the first time I had ever seen Canada. And so that was really an introduction for me to the country. And I met an awful lot of people. And I drank a lot of beer with a lot of Canadians. And it really forged my relationship, I think, with this country and my love for the people of this country. In the year 2000, the feeling of Canadian pride was really high in this country. I got to see that firsthand. I got to see that openness, I guess, of Canadians. It was a remarkable thing to see that no matter how far apart we may be and how different culturally we may be, that at the end of the day, we are still so very, very similar. 2025 is a very different context than 2000. And I think that what we're seeing right now is that when someone outside of the country starts to take aim at us, we can close ranks very quickly. And that sense of identity and pride and love.
And again, you know, he's talking about America, right? Like, even if he's not explicitly stating that, I think this is one of the reasons this piece was commissioned for the CBC, is that we're now, again, as a country, sort of looking back at our identity. And I think this commercial really is pivotal, because I remember even taking like a social science class, like a sociology class in university, and this commercial definitely came up in one of the lectures. And representation matters. Like, we talk about representation in terms of diversity these days, and what that means, and that's certainly important. But for sure, representation of national identity in a way, like, the stuff he was saying was meant to be kind of a joke, but also serious, because they are things we do genuinely love about Canada, right? Like, the things that he goes on to say. So, like, what I would say is credit to the writer who wrote the script for him to deliver that speech, because without it, that piece wouldn't have worked, right? So a writer worked on that piece, and for him to read those lines, and that stood the test of time.
Of this place and love of our neighbor comes right back to the fore.
The first nation in hockey and the best part of North America. My name is Joe.
It's interesting that before I did this commercial, I had never really thought too much about being Canadian or patriotism, what Canada was. I ended up working for History Television and going into parts of this country in the West Kootenays or Churchill, Manitoba, Norway House, Manitoba, Joa Haven in Iqaluit, places that most Canadians never get to see. Meeting the people there, interacting with the people there, staying with the people in those places. Then I came to CBC and ended up having conversations with people across the country and around the world. And this has always led me to consider and reconsider and reevaluate who we are, or at least from my point of view, who we are and what we stand for as a country. And it is interesting for someone who lived the first 27 or 28 years of their life without really thinking about it, what a profound love I've come to have for this country. Not even so much for the country, because the country is sort of a weird esoteric notion for me, but for the people of this country. I know we have been far from perfect.
I'm glad.
And I know our past has been problematic and violent at times.
I'm glad he makes that distinction too, because I sort of feel very similar as this gentleman here. I'm not a fan of nationalism, patriotism at all. I think part of the reason we see Trump is because for generations, Americans believed in the myth of American excellence. They believed in America number one, right? So that led to the creation of the MAGA movement, right? Which a lot of people do see as the modern day Nazi, right? So I think that sort of sowed the seeds for that to happen. So I, in a way, am not surprised what's happened to our neighbors. And I would caution ourselves, even as we go through this resurgence of patriotism, to, channel it now because it is productive to do so, and, hold our hands, so figuratively speaking, as Canadians together, and stand in solidarity. But, let's not take it overboard to the point where we become comical like the Americans. So yeah, I would just maybe caution that. And the other thing is that he mentions is not so much the country, but Canadians, the people of the country. Because after all, like, the border, so to speak, is an artificial line, right? Like, if you look at a map of Europe through, the 20th century, things changed, right? So we need to be cautious. But I will say one of the things that's good about Canada is that, we do have a sense of restorative justice. We do have a sense of truth and reconciliation. Could we be better at it? Sure, absolutely. But at least we can reckon with ourselves. We are capable of looking inwards. I don't know that that's true of our neighbors.
I believe that we believe in the things we say we believe in. The power of the spot doesn't come from within the spot. It comes from the energy that is attached to the spot by the people who see it and the people who share it. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised to see it come up because there's something about it that has this quality. And then on another level, it's so far in my past. There's been so much water under the bridge that it's almost like it's someone else who's in it. But I also have to just shake my head and go, Joe, man, they can't kill Joe. Joe will not die. Although he is getting a little older looking, get a few more wrinkles and white hairs.
Great video. Okay, so we covered the throne speech. We did the I Am Canadian video. What was the other thing? Yes. So the Ontario debates. So we will look at TVO's score, or rather summary or review of the Ontario debates. Second here. Give me a second. I watched this earlier today. Now, TVO video, man. Here it is.
Welcome, everyone.
Okay. Well, TVO today.
Everyone to the on.
I hate that. I hate that it not go right to the beginning of the video, please. Okay.
Welcome, everyone, to the On Poly podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, the Family Day Leaders Debate for this 44th Ontario general election took place yesterday. We'll take a deep dive into the debate and tell you whether anything emerged that might change the narrative in this campaign.
And in your column, my column, I will look at the man who is the reason for this election season, Donald Trump and his tariffs.
And given that yesterday was Family Day, I've got a piece up on a father-son political combination. Bill Saunderson was an MPP 30 years ago. His son, Brian, is running for re-election right now. And Brian's great-grandfather was actually the first to serve more than a century ago.
It's Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, so let's get to it.
Dude, a little sugar off the top,
Oh,
as
sir.
always. Some traditions are very hard to break. We don't want to break them. Little T-shirt explanation off the top.
Yeah.
You know what? I looked at yours, and the first thing I thought of, because I'm of a different generation than you, was the Tholian Webb episode from the original Star Trek.
Well, it's also, you went for a Star Trek reference.
I did.
And this is a Star Wars reference.
Which I got 5 seconds later. And that's Luke trying to line up the kill shot for the
This
Death
is
Star.
the targeting computer as Luke is about to blow up the Death Star.
There you go. Got it. Okay. My shirt is a little more
It's
on
very
point
nerdy.
for this discussion because this is, of course, the big, can you see it? There we go. This is the big interchange as you're going up Highway 400, and you get to a point where you're either going to go off to Sudbury, take Highway 69, or you're going to go up Highway 11 to North Bay, which is where last Friday the Northern Ontario Leaders Debate took place. So this is my way of doing a lovely segue into what did you think of the Northern Ontario debate last Friday?
Well, so I think it's worth mentioning that the Northern Issues debate is hosted by FONOM, which is the Federation of Northern Ontario Municipalities, and so there's a much more municipal focus on the topics they debate. And nothing wrong with that at all. As a municipal policy guy, I appreciate I appreciate it, and I think you definitely saw some of those questions that were asked during the debate were very clearly tailored for what mayors wanted to hear, what mayors and councillors wanted to hear. And one in particular stuck with me, which was at one point the moderator asked about would a government led by one of the 4 party leaders amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, which is not provincial legislation. No premier is going to be able to do that. That's not within their power. But it is one of the requests that mayors have signed on to. So that just gives you a bit of a flavor of the way who is behind the debate can influence which questions get asked. Otherwise, I enjoyed it. I don't think any real explosive knockout blows came from that Northern debate. But as we've said before on the pod, I think it's important to give Northern Ontario a venue where it gets to be the focus.
Were you alive in 1984?
I was 3 in 1984.
You were 3. Oh, so
Old man
I'm guessing
question.
then you did not watch the U.S. presidential debate that year. If you were only 3.
No, I did not.
Because there was a line in the Northern Ontario debate that for me was very evocative of something, I was older than 3, of something I saw in that debate, which was it was Ronald Reagan running for re-election, this time against Walter Mondale, who was Jimmy Carter's vice president. And whenever Mondale said something that was a complaint about the Reagan record that Reagan didn't like, Reagan would sort of accuse him of being a nattering nabob of negativism, to steal another line from another president.
So much
That would have been
alliteration.
Nixon. Spiro Agnew, Nixon's vice president. Boy, I'm getting in the weeds here. And Reagan would always say, "There you go again."
Yes.
And that was a line that Bonnie Crombie pulled out to use against Doug Ford when Ford said things about Crombie's record.
So when he said this, I thought this was really funny. That's an interesting note. It's interesting he's making that connection. I don't know if Bonnie Crombie knows that about Reagan. Like I don't think she was that tuned in. I don't think Bonnie Crombie has that much of a political instinct, if I'm being honest. Right? That's just my assessment. As sort of like a armchair analyst, let's say. So we'll see. Maybe. But, I guess he's given her the benefit
that
there.
Crombie didn't like. So for a moment there, this is a very long way of my saying I felt transported back to 1984 whenever Bonnie Crombie pulled out the "there you go again" line. Yes. Anyway, was that a long way to go for a not very good story?
I mean, I appreciate the history lesson. We'll see if our audience does.
In the meantime, let's get on to last night's debate. Off to issue 1. Last night, the four major party leaders were on stage for the Ontario election leaders debate. Overall, JMM, how would you rate the quality of the debate we saw among Doug Ford, Marit Stiles, Bonnie Crombie, and Mike Schreiner?
I've really liked this debate. You and I have watched a bunch of these now, and sometimes they're not always gold. Let me put it that way. I thought you mostly got a very good exchange. Inevitably, these things sometimes devolve. And
I will say, I do think there were quite a bit of good sound bites. So, like, if I, was working the news desk, I definitely, like, especially if I was working, a control room in any capacity, I definitely think there are definitely good sound bites. I do think certain exchanges made for good sound bites. I do agree with him here.
Into a lot of crosstalk, and you can't necessarily hear what people are saying. That happened in this case, but I don't think it spoiled the entire debate. I liked the more lighthearted questions that they tossed in to break up the.
So I don't enjoy this. This is sort of, I guess, where I veer. Sort of like, I feel like this is a very sort of liberal take for him to say, like, oh, I liked it, how it humanizes the politicians. Do we really need to humanize these politicians? Maybe we can stop doing that, because it's not, it's led to some horrible things happening. But I will say, my own personal experience as a reporter, when I covered a municipal election, this was something that my newspaper did. And this was something that the audience hated. They despised this. I remember getting calls from like community members, because I was like a community news reporter, a local beat, right? And people were like, what are you doing? Why are you giving them like softball questions? And the answer was, as he's saying, to humanize this and stuff like that. I had personally no control over who gets asked what questions. And the thing is, usually the forerunners were given these sort of softball, lighthearted questions so that they would be more inclined to respond as well, right? And so we had content, you know what I mean? And it just like I said, I think personally it caused more of a distaste in people's mouths. Maybe you could argue, I guess, in a debate format, it's for political leaders, for premier, it's a bit of a different situation, but I don't think so. I personally didn't like it. Like they all gave like their answer, like if you were invited to their house, what would each cook, for example. And I will say, like, Doug Ford saying macaroni and cheese was hilariously inept, which is perfectly, like, it summates his his political career perfectly. But other than that, like, the difference between Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles, like, I don't think that came across. And I really hate this idea of like, oh, I need to vote for the person who I'm gonna have a beer with. Like, that, it shouldn't be like that. Like, in my opinion, like, I think you should be voting for the guy smarter than you, right? And yeah, I know that can come across kind of condescending. I know that didn't work for Michael Ignatieff, for example, who was an academic who ran, I think it was federally, didn't he? Ran federally, but never succeeded in his liberal. Like, he performed very poorly as liberal leader to my recollection. So yeah. Anyways, getting back on.
I say this is somebody who loves policy debates, but break up the policy tedium.
Yeah.
You know,
What did they asked? Like, if you had a weekend off, what would you do? Or
yes,
if you had to cook a meal for somebody, what would you do?
Yes,
what
exactly. What was your first job?
Yeah.
I can't imagine there are that many voters who are going to be making their decision next week about who to vote for based on those questions. But you know, it is nice to remember that there are people behind these faces and behind these parties.
Politicians, they're just like us.
Well, not entirely just like us, but close to it. Yes. Yeah. Just about those little lighthearted moments. You know, people were asked what was your first job, and Doug Ford mentioned that his very first job was delivering the Globe and Mail newspaper, but I think he referred to his real first job was working at a meatpacking plant. This is
okay. That part is wild to me because this was something so innocuous that Doug Ford still lied about. That he still lied about working at a meatpacking plant instead of delivering the Globe and Mail. Like, why? Like, maybe, I guess, like, maybe he was too young. When he did do those deliveries, like, you know what I mean? Like, why? If he's written a book or somebody ghost wrote a book for him and he told them he worked at a meatpacking plant and that's actually what happened, why lie? Why lie about something like this that can be fact checked? You know what I mean? Like, it's so bizarre to me.
Something that, you know, has come up before in his biography. It's one of those details that I think, unless you've been paying a ton of attention to provincial politics, it may have eluded your notice. But what he didn't mention, and I think is actually like a really interesting point about his biography, is that because of that time he spent working at a meatpacking plant, he has not eaten red meat in whatever 40 years. That is just a result of that experience.
Yeah, an interesting little biographical detail. It's also, you know, when he said that, I thought about the fact that he has made a lot of changes as it relates to alcohol policy, yes. And he also doesn't drink.
Yes.
Yeah, never drinks alcohol.
Yeah, and like, you know, what is Ford Fest? You know, sometimes, often, many times a year, except a big barbecue. And I suspect that Doug is not eating the hamburgers at Ford Fest, you know?
Right. Now, I'm trying to remember now. I think Bonnie Crombie said her first job was as a 14-year-old cash register checkout clerk at Woolco.
Yes.
And she mentioned she had to lie about her age to get that job.
Yes.
I think Marit Stiles said she was a swim instructor.
Yep.
What did Mike Schreiner say he was?
Mike Schreiner grew up on a farm. So,
oh, yes, he grew up on the farm and was running a combine at an age when he probably shouldn't have been.
Yes.
But yeah, that was interesting stuff.
A lot of people violating child labor laws
Yeah.
at debate stage.
Well, we are going to go through some of the more noteworthy moments from last night's debate, and we want to start with this rather sharp attack by the Liberal leader, Bonnie Crombie, on the PC leader, Doug Ford. Let's roll that.
Doug, I have one question for you, and one question only. After 7 years of lies, why should anyone trust a word you say?
Okay, that one was pointed for sure, and I know that last night when you and I were sort of going over the script, we emailed each other and said that was a zinger, and there was more that ensued from that.
Yes.
What did you see in that exchange?
Well, that exchange and others that happened through the debate, we know that Bonnie Crombie's, one of her biggest liabilities right now in this election is that she is still a relatively recently picked leader of the Liberal Party. Many voters just do not know who she is. She's obviously a big name in Mississauga politics, Peel region more broadly. But beyond that, she has this, the problem that a lot of opposition leaders always end up having, which is that they're just simply not as well known as the premier. So when you're on a stage like this, when you're on the debate stage, you've got a bunch of different jobs, but one of them is simply to try and be memorable, right? You want the voters to be able to pick you out of a lineup 24 hours later, right? You don't want to spend 90 minutes on TV and not have anybody remember what you said. So I think she distinguished herself in that sense. You've got to not just distinguish yourself from the four leaders, but Bonnie Crombie in this particular context has to distinguish herself as an opposition leader, because there are three people lobbing bombs at Doug Ford. And if you're just watching at home, you may not necessarily be able to determine which one of these leaders is the one who really deserves your vote at the end of it. And on top of that, because this is like, you're constantly balancing these things, you have to be memorable, you have to be, emphatic in your attacks on the government, but you also have to not turn off too many other people. And if I can be blunt, I think this is also particularly a challenge for female party leaders who often a woman leader's antagonism with attacks on the government, which is the role of an opposition leader, can get read wrong. And so lots of different things to be balancing. And
you got to look strong but likable at the same time. It's a tough balancing act.
Exactly. And so...
A great point. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Bit of a shorter stream, but yeah, I think this was interesting. A way to reach out to YouTube, see if YouTube is a little more interested in the news and politics content than on Twitch. I found that a lot of people just don't tune in for the sort of politics stuff that I talk about, but rather the gaming stuff, which is fine. Twitch is a gaming platform, but I'm wondering if there's any sort of appetite there. Anyways, on YouTube or Twitch, I am kind of playing around to see which is the better sandbox. And I think running it long doesn't do me any favors. And yeah, I feel, I'll be honest, I feel kind of tired. I'm expecting somebody to drop by in a bit, and so I may have something to take care of in a bit here. So I'm gonna wrap up. If you happen to catch the stream, thank you. If you were one of the people I was reacting to, thank you for the content, and I definitely support what you're doing. I think, like I said, these conversations are important to have. So if you found your way to this video, please do support these channels, whether it be, the public sector of TVO. Do consider, giving a donation to TVO, for instance, or Laura Bobcat, I said Laura Bobcock of the O Show, who's doing her independent thing, and I think, is having, again, an important conversation in the independent media space. So yeah, that'll be it for me, and I'll wrap it up from here. Thank you for stopping by. Hopefully I will see you at the next one.